Hey, Jess, did you ever get to know Tony Morgan, late Tony Morgan?
I didn't. I wish I did, but I didn't.
His death was shocking
Right.
um, because of his relative youth when he had his heart attack,
Hmm.
but his death was shocking as well because he has just been at the forefront of church consultation for years.
Right.
Uh, he leaves a wife and some young adult children
Hmm.
behind, but he also leaves a void in the whole world of helping churches.
Right.
I understand that his organization, the Unstuck Group, is going to continue, and I'm grateful for that. But Tony will be missed.
Hmm.
I have worked with him primarily in saying, "Hey, can you handle this one for me? This particular consultation, because I think it's better for you, or perhaps we're at capacity right now." And
Hmm.
I've actually worked with him and found him conference space, and we've collaborated.
Right.
We've talked over the years, and one thing about Tony Morgan is he was the real deal. There was no pretentiousness to him. Sometimes the celebrity Christian culture is just bad, and
Sure.
he wouldn't even think of himself as a celebrity. He would just think of himself as a humble servant wanting to help churches, and he will be missed. The reason that I'm thinking about him is I think it may still be on the website of Unstuck. I don't know. They may have changed it, but he has a quote that says, "We don't like to refer to ourselves as church consultants because he didn't say because there's baggage. He just said we don't like but we have to because that's the only way people can find us when they search for us." And
Okay.
so they put it in the search, the Unstuck Group, church consultants, and that, and that's kind of a segue to this, and we've got a series of things that we're going to go through, but I'll start off this first one, and then we can tag team through it. But the entire presentation is surprise, 11 surprising lessons from a church consultant.
Hmm.
Now, do you think it would help if I tell the story of me as a church consultant?
Um, I guess so. Yeah. This is I have heard this is one story I have heard before. This was a long, long time ago in your younger years. I'm pretty sure I was born. I think this was after I was born.
You were 3 years old.
I was 3 years old, so I don't remember the story firsthand, but I do remember it because I've listened to it and I've heard it before, and so I know you never intended to get into church consulting. I don't know if that's a fair statement, or maybe at the time, maybe it just wasn't on your radar at the time. It's hard to say what the future would have held and where your mind was because again I was three, but this was not at this season of life. You didn't plan to become a consultant, and so as we're talking about consulting and talking about obviously this, just connecting back to Tony Morgan and all the work he's done for the local church and how much it's meant. God uses a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and God used Tony Morgan, and it's been awesome to see God use you in this arena as well. So I would love to hear again. Uh, the story of how you began in the world of church consulting.
When I left the local church in the business world, where I was a deacon, and went into vocational ministry, leaving the business world, at least for a season, behind, my heart and passion was the local church.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, before I set foot on seminary,
And,
I
and,
mean,
and it still is today.
it
Like,
still is today. And I think it is a greatly neglected and minimized place of God's plan in the minds of many Christians. We can talk about that later. And so I walked onto the campus where I was going to seminary and would end up doing 2 degrees in 6 years there. I was there a long time, but I took every opportunity I could to study the local church. If I did a New Testament paper, there's a great likelihood it's going to come from the book of Acts.
hmm,
Or if it didn't come from the book of Acts, it's going to come from one of Paul's letters.
right.
And I'll be talking about the local church. If I did an Old Testament paper, it would be something that would be pointing to what Christ would do through the local church once you get to the New Testament. And so those were my studies. And after I got my master's degree, it was time to get the PhD. And fortunately, there was a professor, the only professor at the time that was offering a PhD in evangelism, which was basically local church-based evangelism,
Mm-hmm.
not crusade evangelism. We did have some personal evangelism courses, but primarily local church. And so I did my studies under him for 3 years. And in a PhD program, you focus more upon a single subject or single area rather than the breadth of that you get in a master's degree. It is often said, and it's kind of corny, but with a PhD, you learn more and more about less and less till you know everything there is to know about nothing. And that's the focus that it gets down to. It gets really granular. And so I did all my studies in that area. I knew the research even then, wasn't my research, but I knew others. And I wanted to find out more about the local church. So when I went to be a pastor, I had a couple of things in mind. One, that is, I was uncertain I wanted to be a pastor. This would have been kind of an eye-opening experience. I thought I was supposed to be, and a lot of these positions don't even exist. I thought I was supposed to be a minister of education. So
I didn't know that.
I can't remember what happened, and I think it had something to do. And don't hold me to this because it's too long ago, but it had something to do with if I really wanted to be the change agent, I would need more of the leadership position, rather than the support position. I think that was going on, but I've never seen myself as a local church pastor in the sense that, I mean, you're one of the best. You just are off the charts as a pastor. I know you're not going to affirm it, but I don't have the skill set that you do. I don't have the personality that you do. And so I didn't see myself as meant for a pastor. Now I'm looking back on 4 churches where I did serve as pastor. I'm not going to count the 10 interim pastorates. That's like being a grandfather. You love on them, and if they start messing up, you give them back to their parents. But the pastorate, the 4 pastorates, I think God allowed me to go through that season just so I would know, and I would have empathy for that role, not because he thought I was a good choice for it. And I can see God just holding. Can God hold his nose? I can see God holding his nose and say, "This ain't gonna smell good, folks." But Rainer's about to be a pastor. But I went through 4 churches, and it was because of my heart for the local church. But here's what I really thought I would be doing: I thought I would be writing and researching on the local church. Writing, researching. So. I got my PhD, and actually, I think my graduation date said December, but I finished the semester early, so I went on the field in the church. Summertime, I remember 3-year-old Jess Rainer all excited because we're going to St. Pete, Florida, and we're going to be right there on the Gulf of Mexico. He couldn't wait to go to the beach. And I got
still can't wait to go to the beach, but
you still have that in your genes, and it all is who you are. And I got there, and I'm going to guess it was a matter of months because I got there in summer, and it was in '88, so it had to happen before December ended. So I'd been there a few months, and I get a call from a local church pastor
in the area.
Okay, and he says, "I hear you can help churches." I said, "Where'd you hear that?" And he said, "Well, I'd written a few articles at that time." And he said, "Don't you have a PhD in that area?" I said, "Yeah, but that doesn't mean I can help you. Most PhDs I know are pretty worthless." And so I didn't. He said, "Well, can you come look at my church? We're declining." So bottom line is, I went to his church, got permission from my church to take a Sunday off to actually go through the services.
Okay.
And
within the first year?
Within the first year.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, don't ask me how I did that. I swung that.
Maybe they're already tired of your preaching. They wanted someone else back in, but who knows?
I don't remember, but I got there and actually sat in the services, listened to the pastor, looked around the people. If you want to know what was going on with that church, go back and listen to our previous podcast on autopsy. It was a church that didn't look like its community.
Okay.
It's really simple. Peter Wagner called it ethnic-itis, that you don't like to, you want to avoid those people that look different than you do, that act differently than you do. And it was really obvious.
The homogeneous unit principle.
What's that?
The homogeneous unit principle. Yes.
That was his predecessor, Donald McGavran, that Wagner mentioned a good bit. But I just looked out there and, You go inside the church, you see one thing. You go out and look in the community, you see something else. And I told him. And he asked me, what should I do? And I told him what I said in the previous podcast. You got to get some leaders from this area. He did. He turned it around. I watched him. He ended up being the associate pastor to someone of another color who became the pastor in time.
Wow. And this was the late 80s.
Yes. Remarkable leader. Now,
Yeah.
we just have to mention this. He was older.
Okay.
And he thought it was a good time to do this kind of handoff for his life personally.
What that's just as a side note, what a testimony to I don't know who this guy is, but his leadership.
I don't remember his name either.
One, to reach out to ask for help, which a lot of pastors don't.
Yeah.
2, then to receive the advice. 3, to execute on the advice. And then 4, to actually take a step back in leadership for the benefit of the church.
Isn't that kingdom-minded?
So, you say this is your first consulting. I think really this was God just using you a little bit.
It was God's work through a pastor more than through a consultant.
Yeah, that was a total God thing. But I see why that kind of maybe got you going, oh, okay, this is good. Like I enjoyed helping this other pastor. I enjoyed seeing God use me, because that is a complete God thing. 100% that happened there. But we'll I get it. You were used as a consultant in that regard. But that sparked a little fire, and I have watched that fire burn for years and years and years. Even those seasons where you've kind of stepped away from consulting because you had other vocational responsibilities, but you always find yourself, or God always keeps bringing you back into consulting. Yes. It makes sense. I've never heard you articulate your seminary education in that way, to where you're always focused on the local church. Mm-hmm. So God's clearly put a passion in you. And it's true. I mean, if any times with Church Answers that, we met with some pastors this week, anytime you're able to sit down as an introvert, sit down with other people, you can see the passion for them. You can see the passion for the local churches. Now, you're really tired afterwards, which we all know. And so you expend a lot of energy, but you still do it. And so what God birthed in you through that first consultation was obviously already simmering there. I'm crossing analogies there, but you can get the point that God had already been working in your life leading up to that point. And so you have been doing consulting now for, 46 years. I can do some quick math on that because I was 3 and I know how old I am. So you've been doing it for 46 years. You're almost coming up on 50 years of church consulting. Maybe there's something
really
we need
tired.
to do. 50 less. I mean, maybe there's a new book, 50 lessons from 50 years of church consulting.
That one would really sell millions.
Yeah. I don't know. It might, but we're talking about 11 today.
Yep.
11 lessons, surprising lessons that you've learned through 46 years of church consulting.
And Jess, we could do 100 or 200 lessons in terms of things I've learned and things about what I should say and how churches should do this and that. I wanted to get on the surprising side that I never expected these 11.
Right. Because with consulting, I think there is some expectations there. Like I know I have the privilege of talking with students who are going through Church Consulting University, which is a great tool out there.
Where we're training more consultants, even if it's for their own church.
Yeah, and it is. There's a good bit of church leaders and church pastors who go through Church Consulting University or Church Consulting certificate that are doing it for their own church, but a lot of them are also doing it to help other churches as well. And so, I could probably sit here with you just based off helping you throughout the years, doing some consulting, some things here and there, helping these students, that there are some lessons that I feel like I could just kind of say, well, that's expected. Mm-hmm. But these are ones that you said have found that you call them surprising. So why are these particular lessons surprising? What makes them surprising without going into them yet? Just generally speaking, what makes them surprising?
Self-expectation, in the sense that whenever I come to a reality of one of these 11 points, or when I did come to a reality, I say to myself, I never saw this coming.
Okay.
So there's just experiences taking place, and all of a sudden, I can use the baseball metaphor. There's the curveball, and I didn't see the curveball coming.
Okay.
So these are the 11. I want to finish just one little thing about the story that I said.
Okay.
A few weeks, 2-3 weeks later, I get a check in the mail from this church. It was $500. Now, Jess, just to give you a perspective, my salary was $21,000. That was a huge amount.
Right.
I called the pastor up and I said, what is this for? Because it didn't have any explanation on it. He said, well, it's for a consultation. And I thought, oh, that's what I just did.
Okay, you clearly had no idea what you were doing on this first one. That.
And there's still many times now I clearly don't have any idea what I was doing. But boy, I didn't expect to get paid. There was no invoicing. There was no agreement. And he was incredibly generous. It was back in 1988.
Okay, this makes this guy even better. This is another thing that I was saying about this particular
I need to go
leader.
back and find out about who that was.
The fact that he acknowledged the value that you brought as what you didn't realize was a consultant. This guy's, we got to figure out who this guy is. I like him a lot.
One of the heroes of the faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So again, then it realized like, oh, we really did do something here. There really was some kind of working relationship that took place.
Yes.
That you went from, I'm here to help. And then he's like, well, yeah, but we had a working relationship. So, there's a exchange of some sort that took place. And obviously anyone who goes to the training, goes to the education, that's an important part of being a consultant is that transactional value that takes place. So that opened up your eyes. So that was surprising to you.
That's not one of the 11.
Surprising that you were a consultant.
Yes. And one thing that I thought would happen as a result of that consultation, I thought they would all be easy and appreciated. No.
Okay. So that put some false expectations out there on you as well.
It did.
Okay.
But I'm grateful.
Okay.
Let's go through the 11, Jess.
Yeah, let's do this. I'm excited to go through these as well. So 11 surprising lessons that you've learned from 46 years of church consulting. I'm gonna keep reminding you of your age and how old you are. Let's start with the top of the list here. What's the number one? And these aren't necessarily ranked. I don't know if you rank.
They're not ranked in any order.
Okay, so no particular order. What's a lesson that you learned, a surprising lesson as a church consultant?
Most churches don't like church consultants.
Okay, that's going to need some explanation.
And it's not a personal thing, but the vast majority would be defined probably as at least 80%. That's anecdotal, but at least 80% of the consultations that we do are for sicknesses instead of we want to deal with a specific area that's going to help you in the future. And it's not a sickness. So we do well exams and we do particular things to help people get better. But 8 out of 10 at least are sicknesses. Nobody likes to be treated for sicknesses. But even more than that, most of these churches have an idea of what only the diagnosis might be, but what the remedy might be. And they're usually wrong on both accounts.
Okay.
So we are a bearer of not only bad news, but many times surprising bad news.
Okay. So you said they don't like church consultants. Do they not like church consultations, or they actually don't like the consultant?
Both and. They don't like the process because it's totally unexpected and you are the messenger. So it becomes personalized. And again, I don't take it personally. In my interaction with them, what I see more is I don't want to make myself too analogous to a physician because that would be overstating my importance. But I see myself as someone that, okay, someone is angry because of the condition they're in. I'm the first person that they're probably going to lash out at. And I just need to listen and work it through to some point. Now, the good news about number one is it doesn't last forever.
Right.
It's at some point they see you're really there to help them. You're not there as some type of nerd that is just going to tell them their statistics are wrong, and you're not there to tell them what a lousy church they are. You really care for them. You really care for their church.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a period in many of these church consultations where you can see they don't really like you. They don't like you being there. But even more than that is that feeling does not come from the person that hires you. That does not come from the person that has said, we want a consultant. That comes when we start talking to the members. And that you can just feel the tension of, why are you here? And what are you going to change in our church?
Okay.
So that's where the don't like comes from. The client, we always ask the question, who's the client? Who are we working for? We usually have a good relationship with them.
Okay. So yeah, that's, if you're going into church consulting or thinking about going into church consulting, what I hear you saying is one, don't be surprised when they don't necessarily like just roll out the red carpet for you, but it's also good to know, like, it's a good reminder, which goes back to the heart and passion. If you have a passion for the local church and local church leaders, you're going to be able to overcome that because they're going to see your love and care for them, that ultimately their health and their vitality and their success is why you're there. And that will be quickly shown as well.
Yeah.
But I can see why that would be surprising.
Second on this, if the client, we're talking about who's the client. If the client is not the pastor, the consultation is usually a waste of time. Now, there's exceptions. We do consultations for churches that don't have pastors. They want to get ready for the next pastor.
Okay.
So that would be an exception. But if the client is not the pastor, in other words, someone else has called you to help with the church, and the pastor is not a part of that request or that decision making, you're going to run into all kinds of obstacles.
Okay. So what would an example of that look like? Like, have you ever, maybe there's a time you've gotten a call from someone in the church that wasn't the pastor. What quick example?
Best example. It was Canada and it was cold. And the client was the elder board, exclusive of the pastor, who had taken a 1 year sabbatical and was about to come back. And during that power void, they decided a lot of changes needed to take place. They wanted my stamp of blessing upon the changes. And when I balked and began to realize that this is not going to work out well, they started balking with me. And it will go down as one of my worst consultations because I had a team of 4 that I had flown to Canada. I had a lot of investment in it, and I basically got chewed out by the elders in a meeting.
Okay.
And they said, this is not what we expected. They wanted an affirmation of direction, and I could not give it to them.
So there's a coup that took place.
It was a coup that was taking place, and I think it ended up being successful too.
They wanted to use you as the shield.
Yep. And it not only ended at that, but with a significant financial investment. I said, I'm not going to bill you anything. I'm not going to bill you for expenses. I'm not going to bill you for any of our services, because they basically told me to leave. I was fired.
Okay. So
they said, we'll pay you up to date. And I said, no, I don't want anything.
So the surprising lesson you've learned is that if whatever leadership structure, all right, I think it's important to note that just there are different churches with different leadership structures, but if whoever is, truly leading the church is not involved in the process, that should be an immediate yellow light, I would say, to ask more questions.
Yes.
And then if you find out that there's something that's taking place that is directly outside of the church leadership, that should be a flashing red light. So
very, very good point.
Okay.
Well, here's what we will do. We're going to get to the other 9 issues, and we'll pick up the pace just a little bit and make sure that we get them all done, because some of these are maybe be expected, but some of them continue to be surprising. So I'm going to ask you, the audience, YouTube, whoever you are, stay put for a moment, and we'll be right back. I want to have a few more words about Cheney and Associates, so stick with us. All right, folks, you hear me talk about Cheney and Associates quite a bit. I want to talk about them again. And in this particular situation, I want to talk about how they are helping churches anywhere, particularly within North America. They're cloud-based. You would expect them to be cloud-based. They can help any church. But one of the things that Cheney and Associates is doing so well that I just love is that they are learning and continue to just improve upon this year by year, what different types of churches need. Now, that's not to suggest that they get away from basic accounting principles, but they understand different denominational groups. They understand different types of churches at their particular age or lifespan. My point is, Cheney's not just an accounting firm. Cheney and Associates knows churches. They are the accounting firm for churches. They're the accounting firm for over 1,000 churches. But check them out. Go to CheneyAssociates.com and check them out. And you're going to find that you are doing business and ministry with an organization that knows church as well as any accounting firm I've ever known. It's Cheney Associates, CheneyAssociates.com. Check them out. All right, Jess, we're ready to come back on this and continue.
Yeah. We're looking at 11 surprising lessons from a church consultant who's been in the world of church consulting for 46 years.
Is it really? It is 46.
46 years. And so we're looking at 11 of these. So far, we've talked about 2 of them. Most churches don't like church consultants or church consultations. And if the client is not the pastor, then there's a good chance the consultation is usually a waste of time. So let's pick up with number 3. What is the third surprising lesson you've learned as a church consultant?
This may sound contradictory based on what we just said.
Right.
But the most helpful consultations are those that affirm the direction of the church. Now, wait a minute.
I feel like that is very contradictory because you just said in your previous example that's what they looked for and you didn't do it.
However, if you find a leader, particularly a pastor, that is going in a certain direction, and you begin to look at that direction, and you can say, this is great. And you can affirm what that leader is doing, not only for the leader self, but also for the church. It puts gasoline on the fire of revival and growth in that church. And I got to tell you, I hope he doesn't mind, because it's all going to be good. We're currently doing a consultation. Church Answers currently doing a consultation with Grace Fellowship in West Palm Beach. I'm just going to put it out there. I was trying to remember how many people they had reached for Christ and baptized to date. It's close to 400 so far. And he sent me a picture. Again, if I got the number wrong, I'm sorry, but it's been a lot. It's a lot of them. I don't have the number right in front of me. He sent a picture of a beach baptism that took place, I think, this week as I'm recording this. And here's what I'm finding with this church. We may, Chuck Lawless and I are the 2 lead consultants on this. We may be doing a little bit of tweaking upon what they're already doing, but directionally, they're doing so many things well. Okay. And our role is not to come in there and say we have a better way. Our role in this particular case is to say, you are doing it right. Here's a few little tweaks that you can make, but don't let us get in the way.
So you're just provide the turbo boost for them. Because I think the idea of, as a consultant, if you're working in churches, your job is to find something that's wrong. And yes. That if you can't find something wrong, you're not doing your job as a consultant. So it's surprising that sometimes the best thing you can do as a consultant is to affirm the direction a church is already running. And like you said, maybe a few tweaks along the way, maybe a few helpful changes, but for the most part, if you don't have to change the direction and you can simply say, go even harder and faster after it, that's going to be a turbo boost for the church. That is surprising. And
one of the ways that we're helping them is to articulate with a little more clarity what their disciple path is, but not only so that the leadership knows it, but so that they can communicate it to the church. Yeah. Famous book that was written by Rick Warren, even before Purpose Driven Life, was Purpose Driven Church. And he talked about Saddleback Sam. Who was Saddleback Sam? Well, right. This is the type of person that makes up the demographics of our community. We need to know that person. We don't need to exclude others, but we need to know who that person is. And they are needing us to help understand that for their community, because I don't know how many nationalities are in that church, maybe over 70 different nationalities. And so, who are we reaching? And that comes back to the disciples' path. We better pick up speed.
Yeah. Well, you talk about like the thing you could do as a consultant that helps affirm it. And so a consultant doesn't always need to look for something bad, but at times you do find something negative, which would lead to our 4th surprising lesson.
That fourth one is consultations often create conflict. I remember when the surprise took place because it was like 3 consultations after that first one. And that first one, man, I like this. They like me. They paid me. Uh, Everything turned out right. And then 3, 4 later, don't remember exactly. I was doing it very much as a part-time gig, even while I was a pastor. And it was in that one that they realized that if they went the path that I was pointing them, it was going to mean significant change in their church.
Hmm.
And so they knew that change would mean conflict. And they were smart. And so we dealt with the possibility of conflict. We dealt with the possibility of conflict management.
Mm-hmm.
And not they went forward, they did it. And they were wise because there was conflict. They were ready for it. But it just reminded me, if a church is going in a significantly bad direction, a direction that you can see clearly they need to change that is going to bring significant conflict, because change brings conflict for many people.
Yeah. So as a
That's the
consultant,
issue.
it sounds like one of the things you can do as a consultant, now that you've learned this surprising lesson, is not only to tell about the change, but also how they can bring about positive change,
Mm-hmm.
how to get ahead, how to conflict management, conflict resolution, how they can do all the things they need to do to minimize as much conflict as possible. And so you learned that early on, and it's probably stayed true.
It has true. In fact, I'll just throw in one of the little books I've written on it called "Who Moved My Pulpit." It's
Hmm.
about that issue. So I kind of just gave a summary in that book of the principles we've learned through this.
Okay. So knowing that your fourth lesson here is consultations often create conflict. Have you, and this ties into our next surprising lesson, have you ever found yourself as a part of a conflict?
Well, you're talking about the weaponization of a consultation. We hear that word weaponization a lot in politics, but it happens in churches too. The best example is to go back to the Canadian example.
Okay.
So I'm going to pick that one as a second thing that happened in there. My consultation was supposed to be a weapon to move the pastor out.
Hmm.
And of course, it did not happen from me. From everything I heard, the church, the elders left, the pastor left. I mean, it was a mess. But many times, especially when the client is not the pastor, one of the things I'm listening carefully is, what are they saying about the pastor?
Okay.
And why isn't the pastor there right now?
Hmm.
So that goes back to some of the others that I've said. But yeah, you can smell it when you know that they're calling you, because it doesn't take long where they start talking about, well, we got this person. It may not be the pastor sometimes. Sometimes it's the pastor. Got a call not too long ago. In fact, he's come back to me today. And he basically wants me to move out a staff pastor and a staff person and say a lot of bad things about the person. I told him that's just not my role.
Right.
And he wants to use the consultation to do his work
Hmm.
to move someone out.
So I guess it would be a sub point of this one. Something you've learned that maybe was surprising is that you've got to learn when to step away as a consultant.
That's a
Uh,
good point.
and so that, to me, when I hear you say that, it can happen where a consultant can be used in a way that's not intended, because your
Right.
job is to help create positive change. And if you're being used, you find out in a way to create negative change, then a surprising lesson is you need to get out. And you mentioned before, sometimes it can affect you. Like you may have to eat some costs. But I agree,
I
just for the,
ate a lot of costs in the one I mentioned to you.
yeah, but it's important to know that, because if you find that out and you move forward with it, as a consultant, you're gonna be used, and you're gonna be a part of that. And so for you to be able to walk away from it and say that's not what I do, that can be often a surprising lesson as well. So that was
Exactly.
number 5. We're on our way to 11. What's number 6?
Number 6 is we have tools that we think are very helpful for churches. And one of the ones that can really get a little bit of pushback and discomfort is the one where we ask the church to survey members about what they believe.
Hmm.
The tool is called Know Your Beliefs. Your church has been through it.
Right.
Let me give you the reason why there is discomfort in that particular tool. It is because church leaders, particularly pastors, take personally any type of erroneous belief, any type of non-biblical belief in the church. What am I doing with my preaching? Why is this taking place? Why haven't I communicated this well enough? Why haven't I been the kind of leader that these are basic doctrinal truths? Why haven't I done that? And I keep talking about my books, but I guess when you have almost an hour-long podcast, you can. I have a new book that says it's about where have all the church members gone, and the wake-up call for the pastor is when he takes the survey, or his church takes this survey.
Okay.
And it breaks his heart because he had no idea that this was what their church members believed.
And again, the survey, so just for clarity's sake, the survey is presented to the church members, the church body. They take it about what they individually believe. The data is collected. It's anonymous. The data is collected and presented in summary form. And so the leaders, the church leader, the pastor, is looking at collectively as a summary, what does their particular church believe? Yeah, I did it at my church recently. And I would say it wasn't, you mentioned it could be painful. It wasn't painful, but it was a little bit eye-opening. Like,
that's fair.
I really thought I had said that. And then, I went to my leadership like, well, you have said that, but why doesn't our church believe more? Why are we at 60% when that should really be 80, 90, 100%? And so it is, I could see why that is a resisted tool if you're doing church consulting, because it can open it up to feelings of deficiency. But really that's an important piece because it tells you a lot about the church and their thoughts and their beliefs. And two, it affects the culture. It affects direction, and it can change things. So even for me, like, it's changed some of the things that I do in my preaching.
That means you're using it positively.
Yeah. I'm being very clear on some of these things. I'm going to say it just like the Bible says here. And so, but I can see why it's a resisted tool. And so, if you're a consultant, or thinking about becoming a consultant, it's an important one. It's a good one to have done, though, even though it's the most resisted tool. So that was a surprising lesson that you learned. Let's move on to number 7.
If you do a Know Your Community report, the demographic and psychographic study, and it does not give you some type of strategy, you're probably missing out, and the consultation will fail. And what I mean there is we're giving you a statistical but thorough look at your community. We're telling you who is there, not only who is there and what their ages are and what their race or ethnicity is and what their income is, but we're also telling you a lot about what they believe and what their hearts are in terms of their needs and wants and hopes. And if you look at all that information, which in ours is 30 plus pages, 33, 34 pages for Know Your Community, and you look at that report and you just say, that's nice. And then we're using that as a consultation tool. That means they don't really want to know their community because it's not affecting the change that we would recommend in a consultation, or maybe not even the change, but the affirmation. Sometimes you need to keep doing what you're doing. But my point is, if information about the community does not get at the heart of the church, you're probably going to have a failed consultation.
Okay. And I hear that in two different ways.
All right.
When you say a failed consultation, you can say as a consultant, if you're out there doing church consulting and you don't use the demographic and psychographic report to produce a strategy, it could fail. But the other side is that if as a consultant, if you do use the demographic and psychographic, the Know Your Community report to produce a strategy, but the church chooses not to do it, then they will fail as a result. Are both those true?
I meant the latter, but the former is true as well.
Okay.
I was referring to the church not using it, but if a consultant doesn't use it, it'll have the same effect.
Okay. Because it goes back to, one, the importance of the Know Your Community survey, understanding the demographics and psychographics, because if you don't understand the demographics of the community you're trying to reach, you won't be able to reach them.
Yes.
And so for me, it's surprising and to think about when I hear that, just the importance of it, the absolute importance of it. It is the backbone of doing a consultation. And really, if you're a church leader, any church leader listening to this, it's a backbone to ministry. And so even if you're not thinking about consulting, maybe you're just a local church pastor, go do a Know Your Community report. You got to get it done.
Exactly.
All right. Number 8.
Every consultation Church Answers has been involved in recommends that you do a little more evangelism or a lot more. I have yet to find a church that has a level of evangelism that we can say you have arrived.
Yeah.
So it's almost like telling a person, you've exercised enough. You don't need to exercise anymore. No. This is the life and breath of a church, of a local church, of a Christian. And if you are not pushing more and more forward in evangelism, then you are retreating. And Jess, in our church where you are the pastor, we remind each week that there's a big old harvest out there. But, we don't need to pray necessarily that we get prospects. No, it's there. Mm-hmm. We need to pray for workers to go into the harvest field.
Yeah.
And that is a continuous action that we are pushing churches to more and more. When we were working, you and I were working with some churches this week, there was shock on their faces when we said, if a church does some type of evangelism emphasis once a quarter, they're in the top 5% of all churches in terms of how much they do evangelism.
Right.
And then they were shocked. And then we found out they weren't doing any. So,
right. Yeah. So to make this surprising here, you mentioned a church earlier that is doing very well. They had 400 baptisms year to date.
Yes.
You're doing a consultation. So based off this surprising lesson, one of your recommendations is going to be increased evangelism?
Increased evangelism. It will have a little bit different angle to it, because what we'll end up saying is you are not going to see the disciples made unless you do the following. So it's evangelism enhanced by a structure.
I mean, that is surprising, but I'm also thinking, as a consultant, at least there's always one low-hanging fruit that you can always
that's right
always use. So
if you know nothing about consultation, tell them to do evangelism. There you go.
And I really think that just comes from the Bible.
Yeah,
it's not really church consulting. It's the Bible. But hey, I like it too. But to me, it's surprising that I could think that I would think that church of 400 baptisms, that wouldn't be a recommendation, but the emphasis as a church consultant you've learned is that is one thing you just can never stop doing, and you can never do enough of.
In this church, again, I'm trying to remember attendance around 2,000, maybe a little above. So in the smaller mega church category, and I can tell you that their leadership won't even begin to think of we've arrived until they feel like everybody in their church is reaching at least 1 per year, 2 per year, 3 per year. So they don't think they've arrived. And that's part of the strength of the church.
Yeah, I could see that. All right. So you were doing surprising lessons, and one of the things you do, surprising lessons of a church consultant, one of the things you do is often a discovery call, and you get many different reasons for the discovery call. How many of your discovery calls and the reasons they say they want the discovery call end up being the reason for the consultation, which leads us to number 9 of our surprising lessons from a church consultant?
Yeah, only about 2/3 of the time will the reason for the request be the reason given for the request is not the primary reason what they need. Let me be clear. 2/3 of the time, what they're asking for is not what they need.
Right. All right. So just to cut to the chase on this one, why?
Because what they need is going to be more difficult.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. They want to do something a little basic. Maybe it's not a silver bullet, but it's not nearly as hard as some of the changes that we think they need to make. And I'm talking about core changes they need to make.
Okay.
Sometimes it involves personnel, which is another issue.
Well, you mentioned my guess would be 2/3 of the time they're looking for a silver bullet.
Not quite, but I would just say 2/3 of the time they're looking for something easier than what we're going to give them.
Okay. So, again, one of the things you do as a church consultant is you take why they're there, you do the analysis, you do the recommendations. 2/3 of the time, it's not what they expected. How many times, though? I mean, here's our next surprising lesson from a church consultant of 46 years. How many times you actually do the full consultation? Okay, it's not what they thought, but you take it, or maybe it is what they thought. How many times do they actually do it, or how many times do they don't do it?
In those where we have follow-up. Now, to be clear, consultations are sometimes one-time offerings. That's the decision of the church. We think it works better when you have a follow-up, particularly a coaching type of process,
Right.
so that we can make it accountable. But in those things where we know, whether it's a formal follow-up process or we just happen to check on them, many times what we will find out is that the church has taken no action. As a matter of fact, our best estimate is about 1 out of 3 churches do nothing after paying for the consultation. In other words, they sit on a shelf, whatever the report may be. That's why we're very careful these days. We used to give these voluminous reports that were bound and they looked so pretty and they had charts all in them. We still do that. We still provide that, but that is not our emphasis anymore. That's called, in the corporate world, that was called the deliverable. Hey, what are you going to hand us? Well, it doesn't really matter what we hand you if you don't do anything with it.
Right.
So they sit on a shelf, either metaphorically or literally.
Do you, and of those 1/3, so 33% of your consultations over the years, you feel like the church actually did nothing with it. Is there any way to combat that? You mentioned coaching, you mentioned follow-up. Is that all that's needed? Does that get that 1/3, 33% down to 10%? Is there anything that because that's a surprising lesson. That's not a good lesson. As a consultant, you don't want 1/3 of your consultations doing nothing. You can't get it to a 0, that every single church does something. But are there anything else just that you could use to combat that real fast?
Absolutely, because we are combating it. It used to be a lot more than this. I bet as much as a half at one time. So we brought it down to 1/3. Again, my numbers are estimates, but we brought it down to maybe 1 out of 3 who are no longer doing anything. What we are learning is the importance of the discovery call.
Okay.
And to ask more questions, and don't just think that we're going to take on a client and get diagnosis, and then in the middle of that we're saying, well, we're going to get paid for this, but it's really not going to do anything for the church. We try to find out through questions of the pastor, questions of other key leaders who are there, asking what they really want. What is your hopeful outcome? Sometimes when we ask the question, what is your hopeful outcome of this? It's different from the reason they said they wanted to retain us, which doesn't make sense.
Right.
So the discovery call is really important.
This goes back to your heart that we talked about at the very beginning of your passion for the local church. And what I hear you saying is, like, if you really feel like a church is not going to do anything, you're not going to waste kingdom resources.
And I have, but not intentionally.
Right.
And I want to get that number down.
Yeah. And it's surprising if you're thinking of church consultant, it's like, well, am I there? My job just to show them the information. They use it. It's not up to me. I did my job. I think it's very important for a church consultant to try and get that early on, to say, I don't want to waste kingdom resources. Even for me, like I would rather pour into a church for less money that's actually going to do something, versus a big church that's going to pay a lot that does nothing.
Perfect statement.
It's the resources. So that's number 10. Number 11, the final surprising lesson from a church consultant. What is the final one?
I have been surprised that the number of churches that ask for a well consultation, and it's because they're the healthiest. Now, they shouldn't be, but hey, we want to check up. The first thing I think about when they say we want to check up is there's something wrong. But more of these churches that just want a general how are we doing type of thing, and there's nothing specific, they tend to be the healthiest churches because they don't want to be surprised that they're not doing something they should be doing. Mm-hmm. And in most of those consultations, we have incremental recommendations, but not major recommendations.
Yeah, I can translate real quickly to the medical field. My doctor does annual wellness checkup. He's very adamant about coming in and let's get your numbers. Let's get your trends.
Right.
I want to see year after year, what's your cholesterol doing? What's your blood pressure doing? Is there something that we can get ahead of earlier if something begins to change that if you didn't catch for 5 to 10 years, it could have a detrimental effect?
Perfect example. We thank Dr. Allen, don't we?
Oh, he's fantastic. So as a church consultant, look for those. As surprising, mostly you think, it's going to be revitalization work. It's going to be consulting work. But as a consultant, if you can find those and even maintaining, right? I think probably my guess is maybe some of your most rewarding work as a consultant has been those annual wellness checks where it's a lot less time. It's a lot less energy, but it's, hey, all these things, we need to get your blood pressure down just a little bit. Is that true?
Yeah. They're not annual. They're usually more once every 2 to 3 years,
Okay.
but the same principle. It is rare for us to get a church that comes back in a year, but maybe they should. But we're grateful for those that come back, even if they don't think they obviously have anything explicitly needed. They just check on us, see how we're doing.
Yeah.
Every 2 to 3 years.
Well, 11 surprising lessons from a church consultant. Some of these, for me, being in the church, watching you in the church consulting world, I could see that. Some of these were very, very surprising, even hearing them from you. But it makes sense. After 46 years,
There you go.
four away from 50,
Of consulting.
4 away from half a century. I don't know. I'm trying to make you feel older. If I could do any any more.
You've accomplished it a long time ago.
You have discovered 11 surprising lessons from a church consultant. So
People ask, before you close it up, Jess, people ask me how many consultations I've done. I used to count them by the number of times I was on the field, and it was in the few hundreds. I no longer count them. I cannot give you a number, but when you count the number of times I speak with someone that I maybe meet with in a coaching relationship for a little while, it's now gotten into the few thousands. So I may not be smart, but I'm experienced.
Okay.
And
I'll allow that. I'll
And
allow
old.
that. So if someone's listening to this for the first time, and obviously this is surprising lessons from a church consultant. So my guess is there are probably some people listening that are thinking about, maybe I should do this. Church consulting. Rewind. And if you could go back to yourself 46 years ago as someone who was just starting off, what would be the one thing that you would tell a potential church consultant today that you wish you could have told yourself 46 years ago?
I think that's a softball question, isn't it?
I don't know. I'm curious. It wasn't meant to be, but I'm kind of curious.
The first thing I would say is get trained as a consultant.
Okay.
And I didn't have that opportunity. So, we train consultants. We try to multiply ourselves.
Right.
And we don't hire those people that we train, but we try to multiply what we do. And so we have Church Consultation University, where you become a certified church consultant. And whether it's for your own church or for a future life that you may have or whatever, we bring you all of this information that we've lived through. And we say, here's that for you. And then if there was no training, which may have been the basis for all of this, I would say always ask the question, what are you doing to reach the wall beyond the walls of the church? Let that be one of your first questions. I knew it intuitively, but no one ever told me that should be at the forefront.
That's really good. And obviously here at Church Answers, we train church consultants. And so that's one of the cool things that I get to do is I get to talk with a lot of those
You've talked with a lot of them over the years.
Go through that. So, but with Church Answers, if you're listening to this, you're interested in becoming a church consultant, reach out to us. And so we would love to help train you as well. So this was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. It's been fun. These longer form podcasts, we may keep on trying them, see if the audience likes it. We want to make sure we're delivering what they need and where the pain point will be. But we're able to get a lot more granular in these type of podcasts. We'll see how they go. Thanks again, everyone, for being a part of the Church Answers podcast. Keep on coming. We appreciate you so much.